Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Andrea and I talking about the 5 reasons you're not making progress in your fat loss phase. So really, I think it's going to be relevant to a lot of listeners, most everyone. I think these are all things that I've had to learn personally in my fat loss phase, but more so speaking to those instances where you feel like you're nailing it, you feel like you're hitting your macros, you feel like you're doing everything you should, but you're not seeing the progress you feel like you should be. So again, I would say this is typically where like a lot of people bring in a coach. So really just speaking to a lot of the most common issues we see that keep people stuck in that place. Before we get into that, Andrea, anything new going on with you this week you want to fill us in on?
Not really anything new. I had my labs drawn Friday, which we had talked about last week, and I haven't gotten everything back yet. So I don't know. I don't know if yours are like this. Mine always come back 90% really, really quickly, and then testosterone and reverse T3 take forever. Is that how yours are?
Reverse C3 normally seems like it takes a while. I never get mine back though, incomplete. I always get them all
Oh,
at
really?
once. Yeah,
I think it's because I use Quest,
fair enough.
and that's how they do it. But anyway, I'm just waiting on everything to get back, and then we should start the fat loss phase on Sunday.
Hey,
So,
okay,
yeah.
cool. I'm excited for that. You've already kind of been in fat loss for quite a while, it seems like, but
Yeah, she goes at a health phase, but it's just basically like I
fat
told
loss
Natalie it's like a
light.
psychological trick to feel like you're not dieting as long because like you're kind of not aggressively dieting and get a little bit of it off and then you start the fat loss phase. So,
Just playing mind games with you.
yeah, I think what it really is mostly is we reduced food to like just under maintenance. So like your inflammation, which is really just like water weight, comes down, and like the fullness from so much food comes down. And you lose a little bit of weight that way, but it also gives your body a break from pushing food as much so
Yeah.
that when you go get your labs drawn, you don't have that as a factor. Because when you're pushing food, that's a stressor too, just like being in a diet phase. And like, cholesterol could be up or glucose could be up, like all of these things that won't be when you're in maintenance and like homeostasis.
That makes sense. Okay. Probably is a much better place to see labs.
Hmm.
I will say I do the same thing for like the really more prevalent for my male clients. I don't feel like I work with that many female clients where we're really like pushing food that much. But
Hmm.
like couple of like more advanced male clients I have where we do have to push food quite a lot more. I do see that a lot of those markers are worse. And just when it's like, dude, we've been building for like a year. Like my guy Phil, we just recently went through this with like, and a couple of markers weren't quite as good versus. And then we've seen this like as a consistent trend. Okay, cool. Let's do a quick cleanup phase, and then hey, everything's right back on point. So I've seen that before
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else on your end?
No, that's
Perfect.
the most exciting thing I've got. Anything for you?
On my end, what started a new phase of training, which has been fun. Really stoked about it. Had my deload week last week. I was really, really ready to get back to it. Training is very similar, but we have implemented some drop sets and down sets, which has been fun. I mean, really, it's just like so like where I had 3 sets before, I might now have 2 sets and a drop set,
Okay.
which to my understanding, it seems to be more or less the equivalent as far as the stimulus that you'll get. It's just like the drop sets. And I don't think this is honestly that big of a deal. I think it's like a very, very, very slight difference, but potentially it's slightly more fatiguing to do like 2 sets and a drop set versus 3 straight sets. I think that's really like I'm not concerned about that in the slightest if I'm having someone do that on like a seated leg curl. And for me, it's
Mhm.
like I'm using drop sets on like calf raises, my preacher curl, my seated leg curl, lateral raises, tricep extensions, etc., leg extensions, right? Which is fun. I do really like that. And that is like an element of having the intensifiers in my program is something that I've missed a bit. So I've really enjoyed that. And then we've added a couple down sets as well, which is basically just like dropping load 10 to 20% from what you did in your first set. So I'll use like top sets, back off sets with clients as well. More or less like similar thought process there.
Does he have you use full rest before the downset?
Yeah. So the downside is, yeah, just basically like a back off set. The drop
Yeah.
sets, I just like something like 30 seconds, I believe, and then get into it, which is pretty similar to how I program it as well.
Okay.
But yeah,
Cool. That makes it more fun.
yeah, I mean, I was having fun with it before. And I was chatting with him about it, and it's like his take on it was very similar to how I implement it, where it's like this can be a slightly new stimulus in a way without us having to change the actual program. But I'll
Mhm.
very similarly, like when I see, okay, I do want to keep this movement in place for this person, this movement's feeling good, but maybe progress has plateaued a bit. Sometimes I think it's more psychological than physiological, but maybe we do need to like slightly change the stimulus, but I don't actually want to change the movement. So that is where I might be more likely to add like a down set, right? Like a higher rep
Mhm.
set, or a drop set or something of the sort. So I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, it has been fun.
Yeah, I have a couple of shoulder movements and glute movements where my coach added a third set on things that are like a higher rep set too. And it's fun because like you get a better pump, it feels good.
No, no, absolutely. Cool. Anything else you want to talk through before we get into it? Do you want to talk about like political views, anything like that?
I would rather gouge my eyes
Who'd
out.
you vote for, Angie? I'm just kidding.
Ronnie
I don't want.
Coleman.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That's so weird. I showed Katie that picture of like the fill in the ballot with Ronnie Coleman. She's like,
Yeah.
who is that? And I had to show her like a video of him yelling. Like, she's like, oh, of course, this guy is so funny. Cool. All right, you ready to get into it?
Let's do it.
All right. So again, the 5 reasons you're not making progress in your fat loss phase. Andrea, number one, what do you got for us?
First one that I see really commonly is just not taking time away from dieting. So, when you are constantly in a dieted state, there are going to be consequences both psychologically and physiologically. So, psychologically, not taking any time away from dieting, it's harder to sustain that. So, just like we talked about last week, I don't remember why this came up, but we were talking about taking a weekend versus the weekdays where you're working. Um, if you're constantly trying to diet, I don't know why that's funny to you. If you're constantly trying to diet, and you never have a break, you're not going to go 100% when you are in the diet. So having that shorter time frame means that you can stay more focused and just get the job done versus when you get out of it, then you can give your body a bit of a break. I'm so distracted because you look
I
like you're on the
can't
verge
stop
of
smiling
giggling.
now. I know I'm not. It was just I just was just remembering how I said it's funny that you would say that you were the one who used that example.
Yeah,
And now I'm like just can't stop. I don't know. You know when like someone tells you to stop
just
smiling
have
and
the
you can't.
giggles.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So uh yeah, so psychologically it's just really hard to take the diet seriously if you feel like it's your whole life and you never take time away from being restricted. Um on top of that, physiologically, you're not going to be building muscle very efficiently, at least. And so that has a lot of downstream effects to where then your metabolic rate never is like in a higher point, and you have like negative metabolic adaptation to constantly restricting. But then you kind of get the worst of both worlds because you're restricting most of the time, but then you are white knuckling it. So then adherence isn't good and you end up not in as much of a deficit. So it's just sort of like this perfect storm of like you feel burnt out and you're not making progress, and your body is just sort of fatigued from all of it.
Yeah, I would say this is one of the most common mistakes. From a physiological perspective, yeah, it can be detrimental to try to always be dieting. We talked about that a lot, right? Even if you're not in a net weekly deficit, if we're spending a lot more time over like hours of the day a week, sending our body the signal that we're in a deficit. And we just have these brief periods of overeating that throw us out of a weekly deficit. Not going to lose fat, but we will still get some of those negative adaptations that would come if we were, right? But also alongside that, for most people, it's just a like, I'm so burnt out on trying to diet all the time that I never can actually adhere to the diet. I really think for everyone in my experience, it's best to, hey, if we're dieting, let's just rip the band-aid off. Let's be okay with like saying no to more things, being more restrictive. It's okay to like be more restricted for a period of time. It's not for the rest of your life because that's probably ultimately a lot less restrictive than trying to diet year round. Which again, I think a lot of people let it turn into that. Like we're too loose throughout the diet phase. We don't actually make progress. And then the diet phase turns into like how we try to live our entire year. Cool. Anything else
Yep.
there?
I don't think so.
All right. Number two, you're not as consistent as you think you are. I know this is a big realization for me. Um, I feel like I've had multiple iterations of having the same realization, like in my own fat loss phase. Like every time I've done a photo shoot prep, like the first one I did, I remember like weeks and weeks where I was like, man, I'm nailing everything. I'm nailing the macros. My coach just didn't adjust anything. Didn't really even say anything. So I was eventually like, all right, I'm sick of like not making progress. Like nothing's happening here, but I feel like I'm dialed in. And then it was like, well, I still am like going out on the weekends and like, am I actually tracking that like pizza I ate, like the drinks I had, et cetera, accurately? There's a lot of room for error there. Even within my foods that I'm eating, I'm guesstimating my portion sizes because like I feel like I know what my portion sizes are, but are those actually accurate? Could I actually weigh those and make it more accurate? Is there truly nothing else I could do better? And that was really crazy to see, like, even with like I had my cardio. I remember at that time I had my cardio. This is again my first one I did in like 2018. I had my cardio and it was like 5 days a week for like 40 minutes is what I was prescribed with a specific heart rate. And I wasn't looking at my heart rate. And I was also just like I would go for like a 40-minute walk instead. And I didn't realize what a big difference that was gonna make at the time either. So I like started doing all those things. I was like, holy shit, I'm suddenly losing like 2 pounds a week. Or in my most recent fat loss phase that I did, um, that I'm kind of ruining the next point that I'm gonna make. So I'm gonna steal my own thunder here. But in my more recent fat loss phase, um, with Brandon, like for that photo shoot prep, going through like, okay, at that time I felt like I was arguing things pretty well. I was tracking my macros very consistently. But it'd be like, hey, if we want to go out to eat, even if I'm in a fat loss phase, cool. Like we'll get like Chipotle or something. I can like kind of eyeball that and be, I don't know, actually not that accurate, but like more accurate than a lot of other options. But again, I'm okay with like the room for error. Where there it was like literally gonna follow a meal plan, just weigh and measure everything. If I go out to eat, I'm gonna have like mustard salads where I'm just like, hey, no butter, or oil, want exactly like these ingredients. Even then, there's a little bit of room for error. Like I don't know exactly how much chicken there is, but like as accurately as I possibly could be with everything. And it was like, oh wow, there actually was a whole nother level with which I could do things more accurately than previously. But speaking to the consistency side of things, I think that in kind of like that first example I used, I think that a lot of people feel like, hey, I'm sticking my macros like 80 to 90% of the time. I don't know why I'm not making progress. But most people see that as 80 to 90% consistent. Like they kind of see that as okay, Monday morning through Friday afternoon, I'm hitting my targets. So let's say you eat 28 meals a week or 4 meals a day, 28 meals a week. 90% adherence would mean you're hitting your nutrition targets 25.2 out of 28 meals per week, or 6.3 out of 7 days of the week. Now, in reality, so that's like, hey, maybe there's a half day where we're not nailing our targets. And even that, honestly, if we're like going way overboard, that could throw us off quite a bit in fat loss. I don't love that example, but I like to just put numbers to it. But really, when we're looking at like, hey, I nail everything Monday through Friday afternoon. And then after that, in the case of fat loss, like if we're talking about a lean person getting leaner, even if it's like I'm just doing a lot of guesstimating like Friday afternoon through Sunday, I would probably put us in this category as well, where we know for sure we hit our targets 18 out of 28 meals of the week. That puts us at 64% adherence, which we're really just not going to make a lot of progress there. So again, if we're talking to like a lean person getting leaner, I think it's important here to look at how many meals of the week, how many days of the week can you say for certain we nail their intake? Now, if you're making progress, like, do we need to live like this all the time? No, there's a lot of room for flexibility in the other phases. But if we're in a fat loss phase and we're not happy with the results we're getting, it is very important to ask, like, okay, if I look back at this last week, how many meals, how many days can I say like 100% for sure, like follow the plan well? Um, I will say as well, like I talked about this with the post I made recently around like how hard is it to get lean and like the different levels of expectations based on how lean we're trying to get. The reality is for a lean person getting leaner, again, there's like very much levels to this where if you are like, hey, I need like 30 pounds to lose to get healthy and I'm eating every meal out, right? Like I've worked with clients where literally worked with clients where they ate every single meal out. And it wasn't hard at all to get them to lose, right? Where it was like, hey, we're changing your soda to diet soda. Instead of eating 3 meals out a day, we're just gonna eat 1 meal out a day. And like, let's just cook from these food options. These other 2 meals, we can drop like crazy. But again, the leaner we get, the more dialed in, the more accurate we're gonna have to be to continue to see progress. So for a lean person trying to get leaner, typically, even if we're taking like one untracked day or one untracked meal, shit, people don't like to hear this, but it's just the reality of like if you're pushing for an above average physique, even one untracked meal in a fat loss phase can have a pretty big impact on your progress. Now, again, it's like, is that untracked meal like a mustard, like that chicken and mustard salad? Yeah, like that's probably not going to set us back. But if it's like, man, this is a very calorie dense meal, but just hard to track, it will make a big impact. So really, again, I think that how consistent that like lean person trying to get leaner has to be is oftentimes it's oftentimes not made clear like what a stark contrast there seems to be for that person versus that person who's like just trying to get like to a healthy level of body fat for the first time.
It's
Anything else
more
you would
than
add?
what feels like it should be.
For
Like,
sure.
I think that that is kind of part of the problem a lot of times is like we all think that we should be able to get away with a little bit more than what able to get away with.
Mhm.
And most of us just can't really get away with much. Like I've seen that in my fat loss phases where I don't eat like what you would think of as junk food really very often at all. I rarely go out to eat, but yet just like little bites and tastes of things here and there would add up to make my fat loss phases kind of like crawl by.
Yeah.
Whereas whenever I got that dialed in and quit doing that, all of a sudden things move way better and way faster. I have one client where we're finishing up the second fat loss phase now, and our tracker has a drop down arrow where you can rate how well you've tracked things for that day. And her first fat loss phase, there was at least one day where it was like the second one down, not perfect, but just sort of like
Like
estimating some things.
69%. Yeah.
Exactly. And she made good progress, but it was definitely slower and we had to drop calories a couple times and get a little more aggressive. She added cardio. Whereas this time, every single day except for one, it was like everything was tracked down to the gram. And her calories are higher and she's not added cardio. And she's like, "Why do you think I'm making more progress this time?" And I'm like, "Well, it really looks like your adherence has improved," which part of that is we knew it was going to be a shorter fat loss phase. But I really think that part of it is that dieting is just a skill and you get better with it each time you do it. And also going through a fat loss phase and having it drag on, you learn that that's just not fun and you don't really want to do that again. You just want to get in and get the progress and get back out.
That is very true. It is so much more fun to not that the first one is so fun, but the second fat loss phase with a client is typically so much more fun. Like you've had time
Mhm.
building. They're like in a really good place for fat loss, and people are so much better at it that you can just make progress so much quicker. I really, really enjoy that as well. There's one more point that I wanted to make there, but I don't remember what it was. I'll let you know if it comes back to me. Okay. Point number three. What do you got for us?
This is if somebody's winging it too much. So preparedness is such a huge thing with the fat loss phase. It is always, but really, like if we're looking at a fat loss phase versus maintenance or a building phase, you just have so much less margin of error because we're trying to create that deficit. Whereas if we're aiming for maintenance or a surplus, your calories are higher And so any deviation is like a lower percentage of that. So being prepared is huge. So if you're winging it, you're just not going to be as on point as you think you are. And that is true for every single person listening to this, myself included, all of us. If we're winging it, we're just not going to be as on point. And winging it to me looks like going into the day without having a plan for what you're going to eat that day to hit your macros, or leaving the house for hours and hours and going, I'll just figure it out. Like I'll just eat something on the road, or we'll just see what happens. Not having meals prepped or meals planned ahead of time. And again, going back to, we just always have to be more dialed in than kind of what we think we would need to be in order to progress quickly. It's the same with being planned and prepared. Even if you're eating things like Chipotle or Chick-fil-A is a super common one, or my favorite's Kava. It's a good option, but it's not going to be nearly as dialed as what you're having from home. Um, those are great macro friendly options, but you don't know how much oil they've cooked the grilled chicken in, or like how much sauce they're adding that day, or how big of a scoop they're giving you. And so there's just going to be quite a bit of variation. And this is mostly with those clients who are lean trying to get leaner, but that's mostly who we work with. And so this applies to that type of person. Now, if you are out and you're planning on being back home, and so you didn't bring your meal prep with you, that's not to say like, okay, now you're screwed and there's nothing you can do. You can always make it work. Like if you have to get Chick-fil-A or Chipotle or whatever, like that's one thing. But constantly going into your day with no plan and having that sort of thing pop up and just sort of like take hold of your day multiple times per week is probably going to hold you back.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times, one of the most important traits of someone who's able to make progress in the long term is typically being able to make the best of the situation at hand. And so a lot of times that means, yes, we are prepared ahead, but also that means when we're not prepared ahead, it's not like well, fuck it, I don't have my meal prep, so thus I'm just gonna, I don't know, eat like KFC.
Yeah.
When's the last time you had KFC?
I liked their mashed potatoes when I was pregnant, one of the times. I can't remember which, but
Like 20 years ago?
yeah. No.
I like the famous bowls or just the mashed potato bowls.
Just a bowl of plain mashed potatoes.
Yeah, I know I used to love those too when I was a little kid. There's also was something so satisfying about like the texture of their spoons and the like styrofoam bowls. Like when you scrape the side of the bowl with the spoon was just like I can just see and hear that so vividly still. It was so satisfying. Anyways, again, that's a lot of times like one of the best traits or one of the most important traits is like being adaptable. Because yes, it is kind of a spectrum of here's the best choice I can make, I could have made, but also like here's the best choice I had, right? And maybe that like Chipotle or Chick-fil-A, maybe I can go eat like grilled nuggets and like a fruit bowl from Chick-fil-A or something of the sort. And that's a much better choice than again me just saying screw it. But I'd say as a whole, for so many people, this is one of the biggest challenges. Um, Again, it typically presents as that person who every week like has best intentions, like I'm gonna do the thing, I'm gonna make progress, I'm gonna nail my targets this week. And then it's always like I always run out of time or willpower is kind of that what the perception of it typically is, but it's almost always just hey, we're just not organized enough. Like we need to plan ahead when we're gonna train. We need to like be doing meal prep ahead of time. We need to be setting ourselves up for success. And I think that a lot of times that's almost seen as like but what if it's too restrictive, right? When actually it's almost always the same person like feels extremely busy, right? And it's, hey, we actually feel so busy because we're so unorganized, right? So if we like got more organized, you would also feel like you have more time. And it's I could talk about that for a long time, but I would say that's a huge, huge issue for most people. Anything else there before we continue?
Nope.
Okay, point number four, you're not tracking as accurately as you think you are. I did not realize how similar my 2 points were. You're contributing a lot more to this than I am. But again, when we're talking about this lean person trying to get leaner, there is a lot less room for error here to make considerable progress week to week. And most people in this instance will need to be very consistently tracking their food. Most of it's going to need to be measured accurately. Now, in this instance, again, we're talking like a lean person. You're already lifestyle lean, try to get leaner. Maybe we're trying to push like right to the brink of what we might consider sustainable. Here, honestly, more than a couple meals out really probably will, unless they're very easy for us to track accurately. We're very confident we're doing that. If there's a lot of guesstimating involved, honestly, especially with like meals we're not cooking ourselves, there's typically a lot more calories coming in than we like. And again, this is just objectively true. This is like another one of the things I feel like it's like frowned upon to kind of like talk about or put out there. But I think this is why people have like such a misconception about like, why can't I lose body fat at this point? Really, again, like if we're going more than like 1 to 2 meals out that are pretty easy to track accurately, we can really slow our progress. And again, as you mentioned before, most people will be surprised with how much more accurate and consistent they need to be with tracking their food intake, measuring things, et cetera, to make progress at this point. Like the bites, licks, tastes, those little like nibbles, all those things can really start to add up over time and slower progress significantly. Again, it almost can like feel unfair for this person. I feel like almost everyone I have worked with in this phase will have a conversation at some point around like, I know this feels harder, right? We feel it seems like we have to be more dialed in than we expect. There's almost always a moment where it's like really like that actually impacted my progress that much. Sometimes it honestly does. But it's just the reality of it. And then when people understand it, we kind of get to more dialed in with lifestyle. Does become a lot easier. Like I think by the time we get to that second fat loss phase with clients, this like place really isn't a hard one to like make progress in. But it's just like that first one is typically as much as anything else, just showing someone how dialed in we really have to be to make progress here. Anything else you would add there?
Yeah, I've seen that exact same thing with most of my clients too, like where with those like lean clients trying to get leaner, if they've tried and failed that thing over and over, then this is often the conversation that we have. Like, yes, it requires tracking things in grams and minimizing meals out and alcohol. And I wish that weren't the case, but it just is. And it's a fun most of the time it's a fun thing to see click with people because once they do start dialing that in, then things really progress fast after that and they can take their physique to a level that they haven't before.
I've also worked with some people who've just decided like that's not worth it to me. And that's
Yeah,
completely
and
okay
that's
too. Like
fine.
I think that we work with this demographic primarily because most people we work with just really love this, right? And I think that honestly, if physique development isn't really something you love and enjoy, a lot of times it's just doesn't because it's not worth it for like people to go past this point, and that's completely fine, right? So typically, like this isn't coming from a place of like, oh, like I hate where I'm at and I have to get out of here. But it's just like this is fun. I like being dialed in, right? It's just like that fat loss, like the photo shoot prep example I was using. It's like, it's not like I feel like I'm gonna be like more worthy of love or my wife's gonna love me more or anything like this if I get more shredded. It's just fun, right? I just want to push myself and see what I can do here and how dialed in I can be. Um, but again, like for some people, it's just, man, it's just not worth it. And that's completely okay as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Last one.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This one I feel like can sound a little bit harsh,
I
but I want to
honestly can't
talk
believe
through
you're gonna
it.
say this.
You're giving yourself too much grace. And the way that I communicate this to different people is can be completely different. So I definitely have clients where they're so hard on themselves and they'll miss their protein grams by 5 a couple days a week and be and like report that in their check-in like I messed this up. I need to get this figured out. And in those cases, I'm not like piling on. I'm asking them to give themselves more grace. But we'll also see where we have clients where there are several meals reported off plan and they'll use the verbiage of like, well, this was like totally worth it. We talk about the emotional value of meals and sometimes that will come back like used to be off plan a little bit. Like this is a really high emotional value meal. And it's like, really, is it? Whenever there's multiple of those per week, I think that we need to kind of right size that scale. And really, if we're looking at different phases of nutrition, that scale of the emotional value has to change as well. Like if you're prepping for a photo shoot, the emotional value for you to be off plan needs to be very high compared to at maintenance that can be much more open. So that's one thing that I see is like, okay, we've got way too many meals in a week or in a month that are worth it to you to go off plan if you still want to see this result. Um, Using being really busy or traveling or being stressed as a reason to go off plan and is another big one. And there are definitely times where that's valid, but if you still really want the result, then I think a willingness to work through those things and do what's necessary to stay on plan is important because there's a lot you can do with like we have clients who crush it who travel all the time.
Oh yeah.
Natalie's client who traveled for uh like Broadway shows, right?
Yeah, actually.
She had an incredible transformation and she traveled constantly. Um, so I I think that the message of like if you want it, you can make it happen can be taken way too far and be kind of gross, but really like there's so much you can work with and really make it work if you want to and if it's worth it to get the result that you're after.
Yeah. I think that like using being busy, stressed, travel as a reason to go off plan. A lot of times in that instance, like what could help make that better? Like if we're busy or if we're stressed, we have a lot on our plate. Having a plan to follow is like one of the best things we could have in place to kind of alleviate that. I don't have to think about my food. This is a structure I follow. I just follow it. Again, I think that a lot of times that is like there's a lack of organization here that needs to be addressed. And then like as a whole, like giving ourselves too much grace. It is a really interesting one because a lot of times it's almost like it gets twisted in a way to like almost, and I don't think people do this intentionally, but I've had conversations where it's like like I went over my targets this week, but like I'm such a perfectionist. I'm really like trying to work on giving myself grace. But there have been instances where it's like, all right, dude, but we've said this every week for like the entire like 20 weeks that we've been working together. Like, is that really the case? Or are we just kind of like trying to use this to rationalize why we're not doing the thing? Um, and I think that a lot of times those things get like, now, how much you eat determine whether you're a good person or a bad person? No, absolutely not. But
The
I
size of your muscles does that.
right, right. It's more so how shredded and how jacked you are, of course. Um, but thank you for adding that. Can't believe I forgot that. But truly, it's very easy. I think a lot of times almost like I see a lot of times individuals using like I'm a perfectionist or again like what is like I'm trying to give myself grace. It's almost a like are we kind of just using this as a way to rationalize we're not actually doing the thing, right? Like, oh, I'm such a perfectionist, and because I'm such a perfectionist, like this happened this week, and I knew I was gonna be able to stick to the plan, so I just fell off, right? And it's like, I think that it's almost kind of like it's still almost like avoiding actually addressing this thing or like the reason we're not doing the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you don't want to beat yourself up over things that you truly have no control over, but the kindest thing that you can do for yourself is follow through on the things that are of value to you and take you closer to the goals that you have.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself over and over using those same reasons to not follow through, then I think it's probably worth evaluating if the goal is that important to you or if you just need to level up and and make it happen, you know?
Yeah, none of it. Like, don't beat yourself up about any of it, right? But it's just, I think, just look at it objectively, right? With like, okay, is this really true? Is this really what's holding me back? If so, cool. Maybe is that like, do I need to change my goals? Or are these still my goals and I need to address that thing? Or is it like, this is kind of like something I need to dig into deeper, and maybe this isn't actually the issue here. Maybe this is a way to like rationalize why I'm not doing the thing. Um, okay. Any other final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Nope.
Cool. All right. Well, if you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor, leave us a 5-star rating and review. If you'd like to apply for coaching with our team, click the link in the show notes, and we will catch you guys next time.